The aircraft shudders violently. Emergency masks deploy. Travelers scream as the plane begins its terrifying descent. Suddenly, the flight deck door bursts open. The injured captain searches the business class cabin desperately until he spots her. The composed woman everyone overlooked, now completely alert. Falcon, he calls above the pandemonium. We need Falcon. The cabin becomes silent. Every gaze shifts to her as she stands from seat 2B. Her bearing transforms from anonymous traveler to commanding presence instantly. Nobody had observed her before. Now nobody can turn away. From which corner of the globe are you viewing this today? If tales of hidden champions resonate with you, consider joining The Last Witness for more extraordinary narratives like this one. The business class section of Aircraft 492 hummed with understated elegance. Gentle illumination highlighted the premium leather seating as the jet cruised at 39,000 feet above the Great Plains. Cabin attendants glided with professional efficiency, providing cocktails and heated refreshments to passengers settling in for the 7-hour cross-country flight. In seat 2B sat Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a woman whose modest appearance concealed her remarkable background. Her chestnut hair was styled in a practical bun, her navy blazer pristine yet unremarkable. To casual observers, she seemed like another business professional, perhaps a financial analyst or management consultant. Nothing about her attracted particular notice, which was exactly her preference. Cocktail, miss? Flight attendant Rebecca approached gracefully, presenting a selection of premium beverages. Sarah glanced up, her eyes sharp and focused. Water, please. Still, no ice. Of course. Rebecca smiled professionally before continuing to the next passenger. Adjacent to the aisle, software mogul Derek Hampton accepted his third martini with loud satisfaction. Outstanding preparation, he declared to the entire section, though I favor the botanical gin they stock on Lufthansa first class. Sarah returned her attention to her tablet, but Hampton wasn't finished showcasing his worldliness. Traveling to the tech conference in Seattle, he informed his seatmate, an exhausted-looking executive who had already activated noise-canceling headphones. I'm delivering the opening address on autonomous flight systems. My corporation recently purchased an aviation software company, cutting-edge technology. The executive nodded politely without removing his headphones. Undaunted, Hampton continued broadcasting his extensive aviation knowledge, speaking loudly enough for multiple rows to hear his self-proclaimed expertise. Sarah checked her timepiece, a utilitarian chronometer with a black face that contrasted against her slender wrist. The gesture caught Hampton's notice. Interesting selection, he commented, leaning toward her. That's a pilot's watch, isn't it? Rather substantial for someone your size. Sarah met his gaze with a neutral expression. It maintains accurate time. That's all I need from it. Understandable. Hampton chuckled patronizingly. Though, if you're interested in aviation timepieces, I could suggest something more appropriate for your wrist. I collect them extensively. I'm certain you do, Sarah replied, returning to her tablet with finality that would have deterred most people. Hampton, however, persisted. Been flying private for decades. Know the crews quite well. Always intriguing to observe them work. I've acquired enough knowledge that I could probably manage the controls if necessary. When Sarah didn't respond, he finally directed his attention elsewhere, allowing her the peaceful solitude she preferred. The aircraft encountered minor turbulence, a gentle disturbance that barely affected passengers' beverages. Sarah's hand instinctively gripped the armrest, her knuckles whitening momentarily before she consciously relaxed her grip. Her eyes shifted toward the window, evaluating weather patterns with professional scrutiny rather than passenger curiosity. For an instant, her mind returned to another cockpit, another moment of instability, alarms screaming as her hands controlled flight systems with the same precision now focused on her tablet. She dismissed the memory as quickly as it had surfaced. Captain Michael Torres's voice came through the intercom, steady and reassuring. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're receiving updates about an unexpected storm system developing along our route. We'll be modifying our flight path slightly to ensure a smooth journey. Estimated arrival time remains approximately 6 hours and 15 minutes. Cabin crew, prepare for possible light turbulence. The announcement triggered fresh commentary from Hampton. Weather formations this season can be unpredictable. I was discussing with my personal pilot last month that the jet stream patterns have been uncommonly erratic. If I were commanding this aircraft, I'd ascend another few thousand feet to clear it entirely. Sarah retrieved a small medicine container from her carry-on, removing a single white tablet. When Rebecca passed by again, she requested additional water. Feeling uncomfortable, Rebecca asked with professional concern. Just hoping to rest, Sarah replied. Would you mind only disturbing me if absolutely essential? Rebecca nodded, noting the unusual specificity. Certainly, miss. I'll ensure you're undisturbed unless it's critical. Thank you. Sarah consumed the tablet with a sip of water, then reclined her seat slightly. Her movements were precise and economical, each action executed with efficiency that suggested extensive training rather than mere habit. As she closed her eyes, Hampton's voice continued dominating the cabin atmosphere. My comprehensive simulator training has taught me that these Boeing models handle weather differently than Airbus systems. It's all about understanding thrust management and control surface response. Sarah took a deep breath and allowed herself to drift towards sleep, her consciousness fading as engine noise and Hampton's lecturing merged into background sound. Her final thought before sleep claimed her was a mental calculation of their position over the continent, a professional habit she had never abandoned. 90 minutes into the flight, initial signs of trouble appeared in the cockpit. Captain Torres frowned at the instrument display as First Officer Collins conducted routine monitoring. Hydraulic pressure reading seems irregular in System 2, Collins noted, within parameters but fluctuating. Monitor it closely, Torres instructed. Probably a sensor glitch. What's our weather situation now? Storm cell is developing faster than predicted, Collins replied, studying the radar. We have adequate clearance on the western approach, though. The aircraft encountered another patch of turbulence, more pronounced this time. In the business class cabin, several passengers glanced up from their devices. Sarah remained asleep, her breathing deep and steady despite the disturbance. Hampton seized the opportunity to demonstrate his knowledge. Typical clear air turbulence, he announced to nearby passengers. Completely normal, though. With better route planning, we wouldn't be experiencing it. Flight attendant Marcus moved through the cabin, verifying passengers had their restraints fastened. He paused briefly beside Sarah's seat, noting how the sleeping woman remained perfectly motionless despite the intermittent jolting. Most resting passengers would shift or stir during turbulence, but Sarah appeared unnaturally composed, as though her body had been conditioned to maintain stability even unconsciously. Back in the cockpit, the situation was becoming more complex. Hydraulic pressure still fluctuating, Collins reported. And now, System 1 is showing similar patterns. Could be coincidental, but both simultaneously seems improbable. Captain Torres nodded grimly. Run complete diagnostics and alert maintenance to have a team ready at our destination. Better to be thorough. As Collins initiated the diagnostic sequence, a small warning appeared on another display. Captain, we have an anomaly in the electrical distribution network. Torres frowned. That's unrelated to hydraulics. Cross-check everything. The turbulence increased as they continued their flight path, the aircraft occasionally dropping and climbing in the unstable air. Throughout the cabin, flight attendants began securing loose items and checking passenger comfort. Sarah remained asleep, though her eyes moved rapidly beneath closed lids, suggesting her rest was not entirely peaceful. Her left hand occasionally twitched, fingers moving in small, precise patterns that might have reminded an observer of someone operating flight controls. Hampton had finally exhausted his audience's patience and turned to his laptop, though he continued making small, critical comments whenever the plane encountered rougher air. Pilots taking the conservative approach to this turbulence should be adjusting altitude more dynamically. 45 minutes later, the situation in the cockpit had evolved from routine anomalies to genuine alarm. Captain, 3 separate systems showing irregularities now, Collins reported. Pattern is inconsistent with any standard failure sequence. Torres's expression darkened. Pull up the passenger manifest. Sir, just intuition. Let me see it. As Collins brought up the manifest on his screen, Torres scanned the names methodically. His eyes stopped abruptly on one entry. Mitchell, Sarah K., seat 2B. It can't be, he muttered, staring at the name. Problem, sir? Before Torres could answer, a cascade of warning lights illuminated the cockpit. The plane lurched suddenly, banking several degrees to the right before Torres could correct it. What was that? Collins exclaimed. Multiple system failures, Torres replied, his voice tense but controlled as he worked the controls. Take manual control of rudder compensation. I'm going to try resetting the electrical distribution. The sudden movement caused several passengers to gasp. Drinks spilled and overhead compartments shifted. The turbulence was no longer merely uncomfortable, but alarming. Sarah's eyes opened instantly. Her transition from deep sleep to full alertness occurred in a fraction of a second. Unlike other awakening passengers who looked around in confusion, her gaze was immediately sharp and analytical, scanning the cabin with professional precision. The aircraft shuddered again. This time, emergency masks deployed from overhead compartments throughout the aircraft. Passengers cried out in alarm as flight attendants began emergency procedures. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm and place your oxygen masks over your nose and mouth, came the automated announcement. As chaos erupted around her, Sarah sat perfectly still, her eyes now focused on the flight deck door with an intensity that suggested she was calculating rather than panicking. She didn't immediately reach for her oxygen mask, instead watching the flight attendants' movements and the aircraft's behavior with analytical calm. Marcus noticed Sarah's unusual reaction amid the panic. While other passengers scrambled for their masks, some crying or shouting, the woman in 2B appeared to be mentally processing something, her fingers now retrieving a small notebook from her blazer pocket. In the cockpit, alarms blared as Torres and Collins fought to stabilize the aircraft. Sir, hydraulics failing. Backup systems compromised, Collins reported, his voice tight with strain. That's impossible, unless someone deliberately... Torres began, then stopped as realization dawned. His eyes flicked back to the passenger manifest, to the name that had caught his attention moments before. The plane lurched again, more violently this time. Collins was thrown against his restraints, his head striking the side console. Blood trickled from a cut on his temple as he struggled to maintain consciousness. Stay with me, Collins, Torres ordered, but the first officer's eyes were unfocused. The captain made a split-second decision, reaching for his seatbelt release. In the cabin, Hampton's earlier confidence had evaporated. We're going down, he said, his voice high and tight with fear. The pilots have lost control. Sarah glanced at him briefly before returning to the small calculation she was writing in her notebook. Her calm was so incongruous with the surrounding panic that it seemed almost surreal. Captain Torres struggled with the cockpit door, finally managing to force it open against the altered cabin pressure. He stood in the doorway, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead, eyes desperately scanning the business class cabin until they locked onto Sarah. The recognition between them was instantaneous and electric. Falcon! Captain Torres shouted above the blaring alarms, his voice cutting through the cacophony of terrified passengers. We need Falcon now. Authorization, Charlie Echo, 847. The cabin fell into an eerie silence, punctuated only by the persistent alarms and the sound of air rushing through oxygen masks. Every head turned toward Sarah Mitchell, who remained perfectly still in seat 2B, her expression shifting from analytical calm to grim determination. Is he talking to you? Hampton asked, incredulously, oxygen mask dangling forgotten from his hand. Without answering, Sarah stood, her movements fluid and confident despite the violently shaking aircraft. In one smooth motion, she removed her navy blazer, revealing a fitted black top that allowed for unrestricted movement. The transformation was subtle, but profound, her posture straightening as years of concealed military bearing emerged. Colonel Sarah Mitchell, Air Force Test Wing Alpha, she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the cabin without needing to shout. The authority in her tone was unmistakable, silencing even the most panicked passengers. Hampton stared open-mouthed. Wait, you're Falcon? Affirmative, she confirmed, already moving toward the cockpit. And this aircraft is in critical danger. Captain Torres addressed the stunned passengers, steadying himself against the doorframe as the plane continued to shudder. Colonel Mitchell designed the emergency protocols for this aircraft series, protocols that were never implemented after she was blamed for the Phoenix disaster. The name Phoenix triggered recognition in several passengers. 2 years ago, the experimental aircraft had suffered catastrophic failure during a test flight. The pilot, never named in public reports, had somehow landed the craft when all simulations indicated it was impossible, saving 3 of the 5 crew members. Nevertheless, the program was canceled and the pilot discharged under controversial circumstances. As Sarah moved toward the cockpit, flight attendant Marcus blocked her path instinctively, years of training compelling him to keep passengers away from the flight deck. Miss, I can't allow you. She's authorized, Captain Torres interrupted. Highest possible clearance. Marcus stepped aside, watching in confusion as Sarah entered the cockpit, with the confidence of someone returning to a familiar workspace. Inside, First Officer Collins was slumped in his seat, semi-conscious. The instrument panel flashed with multiple red warnings, some of which weren't covered in standard emergency procedures. Status, Sarah demanded, immediately taking the empty first officer's seat and scanning the instruments. Multiple cascading failures, Torres replied, no longer captain to passenger, but pilot to pilot. Started with hydraulic system 2, spread to electrical distribution, then backup systems. Nothing in the emergency handbook covers this combination. Because it's deliberate sabotage, Sarah stated, her fingers dancing across the controls with practiced precision. Someone targeted the redundancy architecture. These failures aren't random. How can you be certain? Because I designed the security protocols to prevent exactly this scenario. She pointed to a specific pattern on one of the screens. That sequence doesn't occur naturally. Someone knew exactly where to hit us. In the cabin, passengers clung to their oxygen masks and armrests as the aircraft continued its erratic movement. Hampton sat frozen, his earlier bombast replaced by awe and fear. Across the aisle, a woman in her 40s studied him with growing recognition. You're Derek Hampton, she said, voice muffled by her oxygen mask, CEO of Apex Technologies. He nodded weakly, grateful for the momentary distraction from their dire situation. And that woman, she continued, the one the captain called for. She's Colonel Sarah Mitchell, isn't she? The scapegoat from the Phoenix program. What are you talking about? Hampton asked. The woman removed her mask briefly to introduce herself. Jennifer Walsh, aerospace journalist. I covered the Phoenix disaster. Or rather, I tried to. Most details were classified, but that woman is the pilot who was blamed for the crash. In the cockpit, Sarah had taken partial control, working in tandem with Torres to stabilize the aircraft. We've lost 60% of our hydraulics, she reported, voice steady. Standard emergency procedures won't work here. What options do we have? Torres asked, fighting the controls as the plane attempted another unexpected bank to the right. 2 years ago, I developed an emergency backup system for precisely this scenario. It was deemed too expensive for implementation across the fleet. Her hands moved across the control panel, accessing systems that weren't in the standard operating manual, but the architecture is still embedded in the aircraft's core systems. You're saying you can activate features that don't officially exist? I designed them. I know where they're buried in the code. Sarah's eyes never left the instruments as she spoke. But I'll need your assistance. This is going to be unlike any landing procedure you've ever performed. Back in the cabin, flight attendant Rebecca approached Marcus, who stood transfixed near the cockpit door. What's happening? Who is that woman? Before Marcus could answer, the plane dropped suddenly, causing both attendants to grab nearby seats for stability. Oxygen masks swung wildly from the ceiling panels. I don't know exactly, Marcus admitted, once they'd steadied themselves, but the captain seemed to know her. Called her Falcon. Across the aisle, Jennifer Walsh continued her impromptu briefing to Hampton and nearby passengers. The Phoenix program was developing next generation emergency systems for commercial aircraft, revolutionary technology that could save planes in situations that are currently unsurvivable. And she was blamed for its failure? A businessman asked, his fear momentarily supplanted by curiosity. Officially, yes, but my sources suggested she was the only reason anyone survived at all. There were rumors that the test was sabotaged, that she pulled off a landing that should have been physically impossible. Hampton's eyes widened as he processed this information, recalling his earlier condescension toward Sarah. And now she's flying this plane. If what I suspect is true, Jennifer replied, she might be the only person in the world who can land it safely. In the cockpit, Sarah had managed to access the hidden emergency system she'd designed years earlier. Lines of code scrolled across a secondary screen as she bypassed security protocols with a series of rapid commands. There, she said, hitting a final key sequence. We should have partial hydraulic restoration in 2 minutes, but we need to start planning our approach now. Where's the nearest suitable airport? Torres consulted the navigation system, which was thankfully still operational. Portland International is closest, about 89 miles northwest. Too far with our current system's degradation. We need something closer, even if it's smaller. Cascade Regional in Oregon, 34 miles north. Single runway, 6,500 feet. Sarah calculated rapidly. That will work. We'll need to dump fuel to reduce landing weight with compromised electrical systems. It's risky. Everything about the situation is risky, Colonel, Torres said, but I've landed heavier aircraft on shorter runways with worse damage. Her voice carried absolute conviction. This is our best option. As they worked to stabilize the aircraft and prepare for an emergency landing, Sarah's mind flashed back briefly to the Phoenix incident. The experimental aircraft had exhibited similar failure patterns moments before catastrophe struck. She had saved 3 lives that day, but lost 2 others, including her co-pilot. The subsequent investigation had placed the blame squarely on her shoulders, despite her insistence that the systems had been compromised. The memory sharpened her focus rather than distracting her. If her suspicions were correct, the same people who had sabotaged the Phoenix test were behind this attack. But why this flight? Why now? Her thoughts were interrupted by Captain Torres. Seattle Air Traffic Control is on the line. They're asking for identification and verification of our emergency status. Sarah took the radio. This is Colonel Sarah Mitchell, call sign Falcon. Authorization code Tango Sierra 64891. We have multiple system failures consistent with deliberate sabotage and are declaring an emergency. There was a pause before the controller responded. Colonel Mitchell, our records show you were permanently grounded following the Phoenix incident. Circumstances change when 200 lives are at stake, she replied coolly. We need priority clearance to Cascade Regional and emergency services standing by. Another pause, longer this time. When the controller spoke again, his tone had changed. Understood, Falcon. We're clearing airspace and notifying Cascade. Military escort is being scrambled to your position. Military escort? Torres questioned after she'd signed off. Standard protocol when sabotage is suspected, Sarah explained, though they both knew there was more to it. Her reemergence would set off multiple alerts throughout the defense and intelligence communities. In the cabin, Marcus had taken on the responsibility of keeping passengers informed. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm and keep your oxygen masks on. We are diverting to Cascade Regional Airport for an emergency landing. Colonel Mitchell and Captain Torres are working to ensure everyone's safety. The mention of Sarah's name caused a ripple of whispered conversations throughout the cabin. Jennifer Walsh had become an impromptu information source, sharing what little public knowledge existed about the mysterious Falcon. She was the youngest test pilot ever accepted to the Air Force Experimental Wing, Jennifer explained to the growing circle of listeners. Multiple commendations, unprecedented flight hours, and experimental aircraft. After Phoenix, she disappeared completely from public records. Hampton listened intently, his expression a complex mixture of embarrassment and awe as he recalled his patronizing comments about her watch. And she's been hiding in plain sight, working as what? A consultant? That's what I intend to find out, Jennifer replied, her journalistic instincts fully engaged despite their perilous situation. The plane lurched again, then stabilized as Sarah's emergency systems came online. The cabin lights flickered momentarily before steady illumination returned. A collective sigh of relief passed through the passengers. In the cockpit, Sarah allowed herself a small nod of satisfaction. Partial hydraulic restoration achieved. We should have enough control to attempt a landing now. Seattle confirms Cascade is prepared for our arrival, Torres reported. Emergency services standing by. Good. We'll need to brief the cabin crew on special procedures for this landing. It won't be smooth. As Torres called flight attendant Rebecca into the cockpit for instructions, Sarah continued working the controls, her movements betraying years of muscle memory that no amount of civilian cover could erase. She was back in her element, facing the same challenges that had ended her career 2 years earlier. Falcon, Torres said quietly, once they were alone again, there's something you should know. This isn't coincidence. I've already concluded that, she replied, without looking up from the instruments. No, I mean your presence on this specific flight. The passenger manifest was changed last minute. Someone wanted you on this aircraft. This information caused Sarah to pause briefly in her calculations. You're saying I was the target or the solution? Both, Torres suggested. Depends which side arranged it. The implication hung between them as they continued their descent toward Cascade Regional Airport. If someone had orchestrated this entire situation, the sabotage, Sarah's presence on the flight, then the emergency landing was just the beginning of whatever was unfolding. Through the cockpit window, Sarah could now make out the distant runway of Cascade Regional, a thin strip of concrete amid the Oregon landscape. 2 military jets appeared in her peripheral vision, taking up escort positions on either side of the airliner. Falcon, this is Viper 1, came a new voice over the radio. We have visual on your aircraft and are here to assist. Copy. Viper 1, Sarah responded. Be advised, we're attempting emergency landing with compromised systems. Possible sabotage situation. Understood. We'll provide cover. As they made their final approach, Sarah knew that whatever awaited her on the ground, vindication or further persecution, answers or more questions, her life of anonymity was over. Falcon had risen again, for better or worse. Cascade Regional Airport had never handled an emergency of this magnitude. The small Oregon airfield typically serviced private planes and regional charters, not commercial airliners in distress. As aircraft 492 approached, emergency vehicles lined the runway, their lights flashing against the backdrop of the surrounding forest. In the cockpit, Sarah's focus was absolute as she guided the wounded aircraft toward the runway. Years of training and experience flowed through her hands as they worked the controls with precision that even Captain Torres found remarkable. 8 miles out, Torres announced, handling communications while Sarah concentrated on flight control. Wind shear reported near the runway threshold. Compensating, Sarah replied, adjusting their approach angle slightly. We'll come in steeper than standard to maintain control authority. Prepare passengers for a hard landing. Through the cabin intercom, Torres addressed the passengers one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We are making our final approach to Cascade Regional Airport. Our landing will be rougher than normal due to our technical difficulties. Please remain in brace position until the aircraft comes to a complete stop. Marcus and the other flight attendants moved through the cabin, checking that passengers were properly secured and in brace position. The atmosphere was tense but remarkably controlled, the earlier panic having subsided into concentrated apprehension. In seat 4D, Derek Hampton sat quietly, his earlier arrogance completely evaporated. Across the aisle, Jennifer Walsh had stowed her recording device but kept her notepad clutched tightly in her braced position, unwilling to lose her observations even in potential disaster. 3 miles, Torres updated. Runway visual. Sarah nodded, her eyes fixed on the approaching airstrip. Activating final approach configuration. The auxiliary systems will hold for landing, but expect asymmetric thrust on touchdown. The aircraft descended through the last few thousand feet, fighting crosswinds and the damaged control systems. Military escort planes remained alongside until the final approach, then peeled away as aircraft 492 lined up with the runway. Falcon, this is Cascade Tower, came the voice of the local controller, clearly trying to project calm despite the unprecedented situation. Runway is clear. Emergency services standing by. Copy, Cascade, Sarah responded. Be advised, we may depart the runway after touchdown due to compromised steering. In the final moments of flight, Sarah's mind flashed back to the Phoenix incident. The same warnings had flashed across her control panel then, the same resistance in the flight controls as she fought to save the experimental aircraft. This time, however, she had the benefit of experience. She knew exactly what was happening and how to counter it. 40 feet, Torres called out, monitoring altitude while Sarah concentrated on controlling their descent rate. 30, 20, 10. The aircraft touched down hard, the impact reverberating through the cabin, despite Sarah's skilled handling. The left engine, compromised by the sabotage, flared momentarily before Sarah shut it down. The plane veered slightly to the left before she compensated with right rudder and asymmetric braking. For several tense seconds, it wasn't clear if they would stay on the runway. The aircraft shuddered violently, the sound of protesting metal and stressed landing gear filling the cabin. Then, gradually, the plane began to slow, remaining on the tarmac as Sarah expertly managed their deceleration. When they finally came to a stop, approximately 3/4 down the runway, a momentary silence fell over the aircraft. Then, spontaneous applause erupted throughout the cabin, passengers releasing their tension in a collective expression of relief and gratitude. In the cockpit, Sarah allowed herself a single deep breath before returning to a professional mode. Shutdown procedures, she instructed Torres, who nodded in admiration. That was the finest piece of flying I've ever witnessed, he said quietly as they worked through the emergency checklist. Emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft within moments of its stop, their lights bathing the cockpit in alternating red and blue glows. Through the windows, Sarah could see military personnel among the first responders, confirming her suspicion that this situation extended far beyond a simple mechanical failure. Hours later, after debriefings and medical checks, the passengers of aircraft 492 had been transferred to Portland International Airport for connecting flights to their original destinations. The events at Cascade had already made national news, though details remained sparse pending official statements. In the exclusive airline lounge, Rebecca approached Sarah with a glass of water. The colonel sat alone by the window, watching planes take off and land with professional interest. You declined refreshments earlier, Rebecca said, offering the glass. I thought perhaps now you might accept? Sarah smiled slightly and accepted the water. Thank you. As Rebecca departed, Captain Torres approached, having completed his own lengthy debriefing. He took the seat across from Sarah, his expression one of profound respect. They've offered me a position heading up a new aviation security task force, he said, without preamble, investigating potential vulnerabilities across the commercial fleet. Sounds important, Sarah replied, sipping her water. It is. And I've requested you as my deputy. Torres studied her reaction carefully. Unless you're planning to return to test piloting. Sarah turned her attention back to the window, watching as a Boeing 777 lifted gracefully into the evening sky. For 2 years, she had lived in self-imposed exile, carrying the weight of undeserved blame and lost colleagues. Now, unexpectedly, she had a chance to reclaim her purpose. Ready to fly again, Falcon? Torres asked quietly. She smiled slightly, the expression transforming her face from serious to quietly confident. I never stopped. Outside, the sun was setting over the Cascade Mountains, casting long shadows across the runways. Within hours, the full story of Colonel Sarah Mitchell would break across news outlets worldwide. By morning, everyone would know about the hero who had been resting in a business class. But for now, in this moment of transition, Falcon allowed herself to simply watch the planes fly, knowing she would soon join them again where she truly belonged, in the sky. If this story of hidden courage touched your heart, hit that subscribe button for the last witness. Sometimes the greatest battles aren't fought on distant battlefields. They're fought at 39,000 feet, when someone who chose anonymity must step forward to save lives. Have you ever encountered someone who never sought recognition, but deserved it more than anyone? Sometimes heroism isn't just found in medals and ceremonies. It's in the quiet professionals who step up when disaster strikes, and in the courage to act when everything depends on it. Like this video if you believe that true heroes walk among us unrecognized. Share it if you know someone who's ever risen to the occasion when it mattered most. And subscribe to The Last Witness for more stories where hidden strength saves the day.